Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. We got a little bit to go over today. We have threats coming out of Iran talking about revenge for the strikes that the United States has conducted in the past several hours, well, in the past day or so. And also, it looks like a massive attack slams Crimea's port, and Ukraine is threatening Belarus as well. We have all that and more coming up on the show. Also, call lines are open 540-251-7687. Call in, get your voice heard, and also we do shout outs as well, and we also enjoy to convo about the show. So further ado, let's start getting into a little bit of the news. We'll be starting momentarily in 1 second.
What we're seeing right now, we're tracking a news coming out of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. Tonight, we have very big news. And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer 1553.
All right. So, we will get the news pulled up here in just momentarily. We just want to make sure that we get everything right here. Yeah. Come down. There we go. So further ado, let's get to the new y'all.
The War News stream, and tonight we have very big news coming out of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, and also a little bit out of Iran too. What we're seeing right now, we're tracking a massive attack on Russia's Sevastopol port, and right now it looks like it's a very large attack, and the air defense inside of Crimea is currently struggling, and that's putting it mildly. We're also seeing that Putin's preparing a Belarus false flag provocation, and it sounds like Belarus is already laying the groundwork for some type of operation against Ukraine, and also Iran is now vowing to attack U.S. forces in retaliation for the recent U.S. airstrikes on their coast. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news from around the world. As many of y'all will know, that the past 24 hours was covered yesterday on an emergency breaking news stream on Monday. We do have significant news that has been coming from around the entirety of the world, and in particular, we are currently observing and covering the breaking news story currently unfolding around the port of Sevastopol, as Ukrainian long-range drone forces are currently conducting a significant attack on the ports of Sevastopol, Novorossiysk, and Tuapse simultaneously, with video and picture evidence confirming the attacks on all three major ports, these three being the 3 out of the 4 largest ports and most significant ports for the Russian Navy and economy within the Black Sea. We've also been able to hear additionally that the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian government have issued an open threat to Belarus today after the Belarusian government announced publicly that they had recorded 166 Ukrainian drone incursions over the past week into Belarusian territory, and they were now going to be divulging this information to Russia for future consideration. This information appears to be a clear fabrication, as no actual evidence has been submitted of any type of video or picture evidence showing that there have been Ukrainian drones over Belarusian airspace. The Ukrainians have fervently denied this statement by the Belarusian government and armed forces, and have countered that if the Belarusians enter the war, the Ukrainians already have 500 targets within the Republic of Belarus that are lined up and ready to be struck with long-range drone attacks at the very minute that the Belarusians enter the conflict. Additionally, we've also been able to hear that the Russians are continuing on with their threats about the leveling of the city of Kyiv, with some, including advisors to the office of the President Vladimir Putin, stating that there may be some European heads that will be rolling inside of Kyiv if they do not end up leaving the capital, as many European Union missions and delegations have decided to remain in Kyiv amongst the Russian threats that have been levied over the past several days. We've also been able to hear some further details as well about what the Ukrainians believe will be struck, and we've also been able to hear that the Russian government has already announced that, interestingly enough, the office of the president of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada are not going to be attacked and destroyed in the upcoming attack, because according to them, the decision-making centers of Ukraine aren't actually the decision-making centers of Ukraine, and therefore are not going to be hit. In the meantime, we've also seen the Ukrainian attacks have still continued to rain fire onto the M14 highway in the rear line area of Zaporizhzhia, and as of today, we've already started to see that this is having an effect on the frontline situation around the battlefield of Kharkiv, as Russian Federation forces have retreated nearly 2 square kilometers within the area just to the southeast of the Kharkiv front, apparently due to a lack of ammunition and apparently attempting to withdraw to be able to get some more breathing room between them and the Ukrainian forces that they're currently facing. This is already showing that some battalion combat teams, or battalion tactical groups, as the Russian Federation will call them, are beginning to run dangerously low on ammo already, at least some of them, and we're already beginning to see that some tactical retreats are being done at the battalion level to be able to try and conserve ammunition and also give their units a little bit more breathing room, possibly leading to the jeopardization of the ongoing Russian offensive towards the Ukrainian city of Huilopol, which has been ongoing for a year and a half. We've also been able to hear outside of the situation directly within the Ukraine war that the Ukrainians are currently meeting with the E3, which is Germany, France, and Britain, on the situation of the Russian threats against the city of Kyiv, and it also appears that the Russian Federation is continuing a significant amount of jamming within the area of the Gulf of Finland and the Baltic Sea, attempting to create a GPS jamming net around the Baltic nations themselves and to cause a significant strategic threat as a result. We've also been able to hear that apparently the United States is working on cutting down its force size within NATO under U.S. Army Europe and Africa, and also under the United States Air Force and its command within the European theater of responsibility, or area of responsibility, as we are understanding that the United States is still working to demine and undermine our interest in Europe and its strategic outlook in the future. Additionally, we've also been able to hear that the Islamic Republic of Iran has stated that they reserve the right to respond to the U.S. attacks that were conducted just yesterday. And we've also finally been able to hear as to why these attacks were conducted, and y'all will not believe it, but even according to U.S. accounts, there was actually no defensive strike involved in yesterday's actions. It was largely a preemptive attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran, because apparently we gathered information that showed that the Iranians might be getting up to something that might not be good, but they hadn't even put it into action yet at the time we conducted the strikes.
That's kind of interesting too, as my intuition yesterday was telling me that it did not look defensive to me. So I would tend to believe that report right there, because the evidence was not stacking up to be defensive. Not that I'm opposed to it, by the way, because I am actually in favor of strikes on Iran to get this over with at this point. But defensive, that was a little bit questionable.
It did appear to be questionable, and we did get proof of that today. It does largely appear that that statement yesterday was entirely questionable and has now been questioned. The Iranians also conducted an attack against a merchant vessel today, which appears to be their response in earnest, at least to the point right now, showing once again that the Iranians are conducting armed attacks against innocent merchant vessels within the area. In the meantime, Israel is trying its damnedest to try and get the conflict going again, as they're now declaring a mobilization across the entirety of the state of Israel, and Netanyahu has also announced that they will be conducting even larger ground actions inside of Lebanon against Hezbollah forces, a violation of the current ceasefire, and also a possible deal breaker for the Islamic Republic of Iran that may force them into preemptive attacks against the United States and our Gulf allies, as well as Israel, to be able to try and defend the remnants of Hezbollah that are left inside of Lebanon at this point. The Israelis also announced the death of a Hamas commander within the Gaza Strip today as well, and significant airstrikes have landed within the Baalbek Valley. We've also been hearing of other major news around the world, including a small amount of news out of North Korea and also out of the United States, but we are going to be covering each and every single piece of this news, starting with our largest stories first and then working our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. And before we even get on into our largest story at the moment, we actually have developments on an ongoing story that we'll be covering on air tonight right now. So Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so we are tracking right now that less than an hour ago, we did hear rocket alert sirens going off in northern Israel. It does look like most likely Hezbollah forces inside of Lebanon have launched a renewed rocket attack on the northern part of Israel. And it looks like it's the area of Kiryat Shimona that's currently under attack, it looks like. There's also some other various areas around that same general vicinity that are also under attack. So we're watching that right now. It appears to have been largely limited, but over the past 24 hours, we've seen at least 2 or 3 foreign hostile drone incursions into Israel, and now we're seeing a rocket attack as well inside their territory. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Of course, there is a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, and also Iran's made a very distinct point to say that if all of a sudden that fighting starts again, then the talks will be called off. So we'll have to see where that goes, but we are monitoring that right now at the hour.
And it certainly does appear that we're seeing that continued hostilities between Hezbollah and the State of Israel are still ongoing in full swing at this point. In the midst of the ongoing ceasefire, we have heard that there have been major ground battles over the course of this day in southern Lebanon, and we have a significant amount of video and picture evidence to show major hostilities being conducted by both sides throughout the battlefields of southern Lebanon. But with that, we are going to be getting into our largest stories of the day, which, of course, pertain to another Ukrainian long-range drone attack that has been conducted against the Russian Federation. Today is, like many other days, has been one of the larger ones that we've seen of the war. And just to show you all some of the attack axes that we've seen at the moment, there have been attack paths, at least recorded and vectored by the Russians, to be traveling through the Tula, Oriel, and Kursk Oblasts, the Belgorod, Voronezh, and Lipetsk Oblasts, heading into the deeper heartland of the Russian Federation and near to the Volga River Basin. We've also been able to see that attacks have been conducted directly on the Volgograd Oblast, most likely heading towards the city of Volgograd or the general surrounding area between Volgograd and Adabinsk. We've also seen other large attacks sweeping their way through the cities of Donetsk and Rostov-on-Don, and then making their way in a southeasterly direction towards the cities of Krasnodar and Stavropol Oblast, with some of these drones most likely making their way all the way to the Dagestan Oblast, which is within the area of the coastline of the Caspian Sea. And we might see that the city of Bum Shakalaka or the city of Kuspisk may be hit again at some point in the future. We've also been able to see that major attacks, which are some of the largest ones that we've seen so far, have been conducted against the Crimean Peninsula, including the major port city of Sevastopol, and currently attacks are ongoing at this moment at the port of Novorossiysk and the port of Tuapse, meaning that right now, out of the 4 major ports, economically and militarily within the Black Sea, Sevastopol, Taman, Novorossiysk, and Tuapse, Sevastopol, Tuapse, and Novorossiysk are the 3 out of the 4 that are currently under attack. And we have just gotten news at this moment right now that the city of Taganrog has taken a direct hit while we've been live on air. And so, Matthew, do we have any further information on that at this moment?
So we are getting our first images out of Taganrog. So apparently the Ukrainian attack is still ongoing from the looks of it. And of course, Taganrog's in an entirely different area than we're seeing in Crimea. So it looks like the other drones reaching near the Russian mainland are also reaching their targets as we speak. We see a pretty large explosion. It looks like a direct hit on the ground. It does not look like an air interception from the looks of it. So Taganrog is under an active drone threat right now. We can see that from these images here. So a pretty wide-ranging different area. Again, but the focus of the attack, though, is definitely in Sevastopol. That place has been ripped up badly over the last couple of hours, but Taganrog's also getting some too.
It certainly does appear. Well, I almost just choked on my spit right there. That Taganrog, damn, I'm having a hard time with that. That Taganrog is under attack at the moment. We do understand that this is within the attack vectors that we were just covering a moment ago on our broader map of the attacks that the Russian Federation had largely started to identify or incoming, and it is on the way to Rostov-on-Don. This is the very northeastern periphery of the Sea of Azov, which is a pretty significant ways away from the Crimean Peninsula, roughly around 225 miles to the northeast. This means that the Ukrainian armed forces may be attempting to attack and destroy significant industrial sites and military facilities within Taganrog, as Taganrog has served as a midway supply hub and also a significant industrial base for the Russian war industry, as there is a repair and aviation facility within the area called VPP Taganrog, which has been operational for decades, and we have seen the Ukrainian armed forces attack and hit, causing significant damage in prior attacks that we've seen throughout the war, generally over the past year and a half at large. We have also been able to see, outside of these attacks on Taganrog, that currently a significant amount of reports of explosions and attacks around the Sevastopol area have been coming out, with the following information being reported. In Sevastopol, the military is repelling an attack by the Ukrainian armed forces, and 7 drones have been shot down, reported the region's governor, aka the drones made it to their targets and blew up on top of them, but the Russians don't want to admit that, so they're going to say they shot them down and the falling debris is what caused the damage. We have also been able to see what the Russians showed as some of the attack vectors, which appear to have been using the western peripheries of the Crimean Peninsula to be able to bring their attacks on home and into the port of Sevastopol. We did get a brief amount of footage from the area of Sevastopol port showing the searchlights in the area and a little bit of the attack. So here's the clip. You see the searchlight looking around in the sky here.
That looks real effective.
It's very effective. It's World War II levels of effective, which is basically ineffective in the modern day.
Did they order like a blackout or something? Like there's no lights on pretty much anywhere except for the spotlight. Oh, there's a little fire.
Well, you know what's interesting? I think this camera is generally like sideways, and we're like, if y'all tilt your head to the right at a 90-degree angle, you're going to be looking at this finally in a level like footing. Because right now, for some reason, we're looking at it sideways. I don't know why. Because there are some of the lights of the city right there. You can kind of see them. They're very faint, but we can see the air defense fire finally starting to fire over the city as the drones are starting to come in. And apparently, the Russians are either hearing them at this point, or they were able to spot them with the spotlight, which is highly unlikely. Because we don't see the spotlight sitting in one spot. It's waving around frantically like someone's having a heart attack down there trying to find any drone in the air right now.
So this is a rather calm scenario. Like usually you hear a lot more fire. Like the last time there was an attack on Sevastopol, they were firing around. I mean, they were firing at their own city. I think like several things might have landed in Sevastopol itself.
Largely
like the city.
all of those.
So, you know, it's a lot calmer this time, but still a pretty big attack.
Yeah, it is a lot calmer this time. I think it's because it was filmed a good bit away. We think this was filmed from Kacha or some other sort of a coastal town looking towards Sevastopol, so you don't really get to hear a lot of the chaos that unfolded in the port. And unfortunately, folks, for some reason or another, we haven't gotten any direct footage in the city of Sevastopol yet. That is the only footage that we have at the moment that can confirm that attacks are ongoing and Russian air defense has been activated during the attack. But we do understand that the Ukrainians are attempting to hit Sevastopol for a great many reasons. There is a lot of military infrastructure for the Russian army, the Russian Air Force, the Russian naval infantry, and the Russian Navy that still exists and operates within the area of the port of Sevastopol inside of the Crimean Peninsula. We do understand that the naval wharf in this area is, of course, the largest and most equipped for the Russian Navy and has been used primarily by the Russian Navy up until about 2023, when most of the service vessels that were sitting in this port have been blown up at their moorings, and then they decided to move most of the other combatant ships over to Novorossiysk, leaving only the support vessels inside of Sevastopol, believing that their importance would not be serious enough for the Ukrainians to attempt to attack them, and therefore they'd generally be safe. These facilities have still been attacked even still since 2023, and those facilities may be getting attacked at this moment. There are also oil storage facilities in other periphery areas of the port of Sevastopol, including these right here, which have been hit in prior years, and may be attempting to be attacked again. We also know that there are some Russian coastal defense batteries also based around this area right here as well, which could be used by the Russian Federation in the defense of the city, which may also be targeted, and there's also some important defensive facilities and other locations around here on the southern end near to Misfoilin, which also could be attacked by the armed forces of Ukraine. In the northern part of the city, the Belbek airfield has been a pretty popular crowd pleaser kind of a attacker, or more so an attacked target throughout the course of the conflict, as a significant amount of Russian aviation is rotated in and out of this airbase, although that's started to become a lot more intermittent now that it's well within Ukrainian drone attack range. And there's also a humongous amount of Russian air defenses that are permanently based here at this airfield, and it appears that in prior times, when the Ukrainians have been able to hit any form of air search radars or air defense systems, the Russians have actually taken the time and the effort to replace the damaged or destroyed systems with new, fresh, and operational ones, meaning that the Ukrainians are always able to find an expensive and largely irreplaceable air defense system operating around the Belbek airbase, although its significance and strategic pertinence is definitely not as close as it was in the very beginning of the war. At the moment, we have been able to hear that largely all of those targets are under attack at this moment within Sevastopol, and there's been specific eyewitness reports stating that several loud explosions have been recorded in the area of Cape Foylan in the southwestern area of Crimea, or specifically the southern area of the city of Sevastopol. We're not exactly sure what is being hit or targeted within this area, but we generally would assume that given its location and also the fact that this area appears to be sparsely, and I mean very sparsely built up, at least within this little peninsula right here, it is pretty likely there may be some Russian air defenses that are based in this open field, possibly even a Pantsir, or a larger system like a Tor M1 and M2, or even an S-300 that may be operational on this very peninsula. We're not entirely sure yet, and hopefully we'll be able to get some more picture and video evidence to be able to confirm what exactly has exploded within the area of Cape Foyland, but at the moment we're just not entirely sure what has been targeted or hit within Sevastopol, at least in that area. We can confirm, however, that some explosions did come from the Belbek airfield. We're not sure to the extent of damage that has been caused in that area yet, but once again, it's highly likely an air defense system that has been targeted. Considering that Russian combat aviation is hardly operated out of this airbase any longer, and it generally serves as an air defense hub, it is highly likely that the Ukrainians are conducting further suppression of enemy air defense operations with their long-range drones, targeting and destroying the radar systems that operate the air defenses around this airfield. These sorts of attacks allow for the airspace to be opened up a little bit more than it already is, and allows for Ukrainian drones to make it much closer to the port of Sevastopol and the critical facilities that are found throughout the entirety of the city area to be able to conduct more effective attacks in the future. Not that Russian radar-based air defense has ever proven to be effective against Ukrainian drones so far, it's very rarely ever proven to be effective, but in the very few times that it is effective, that is what they're trying to eliminate from the equation for future attacks that'll be conducted against Sevastopol port. Meanwhile, outside of Sevastopol, we've also been able to confirm that more attacks have been conducted against the port of Tuapse and Novorossiysk, which are both not military ports. Well, Novorossiysk actually is kind of dual purpose, but they're more important as oil loading facilities and oil loading ports of the Russian Federation. And both of these have come under attack again tonight and appear to have suffered some pretty decent damage, at least from the little bit that we can tell so far. One clip did come out of Novorossiysk, apparently filmed by some Chinese sailors, showing a star shell that had been fired near to the Vostochny Raion, and also the air defense fire that was coming from around the Vostochny Raion as Ukrainian drones were still incoming and attempting to attack the port. Oh. There's a air defense missile firing. That's probably an S-300 or an S-400. And then it goes into the cloud cover and disappears.
Look over there in the distance. There's like some gunfire or something going off over there in the distance too, like some small arms fire, or I guess maybe Gush gun, AA gunfire or something, while the other missiles being shot off.
Yeah, that's actually pretty observant of you. That area is actually the further southern end of the eastern side of the coast, because where we're watching this clip from, these Chinese sailors are somewhere within this port facility right here, just south of the small shunting yard or rail yard that we can see right here, and they're filming it from a vantage point. So right now, what they're looking at are these cranes, which you can see right here. Let me see if I can show you all some of this. So there are the cranes that are on that pier, which is a very significant geolocator for us, because you can see all of those cranes on their track right here on this pier that juts out pretty far into the harbor. So that is a very clear sight line for us to be able to geolocate this. And further on down where that S-300 was fired, it appeared to have been fired somewhere around right here, inside of the Vostochny Raion, right next to some of the barracks and command buildings of the Vostochny. The further on down the coastline, where you're seeing those tracer rounds being fired, those are actually coming from just south of the oil loading port, or are coming generally just from the coastline between here and the town of Kabardinka, which is right down here at this little inlet on the southern end of the bay. So that's actually where all of those air defense guns are firing at, just to show you all here once again what Matthew's pointing out. That's where all of those air defense tracers are coming from.
I guess the Russians plan on using the citizens as a backstop when those eventually reach the ground.
Man, honestly, I think they are. And also, here's the question, folks. Y'all want to put bets. How effective was that S-300 air defense missile in stopping a drone attack? Push your bets up. Do you, and it's a yes or no answer. Yes, if you think that the missile actually did intercept a drone. No, if the missile did not intercept a drone and it just missed. So let us know.
No. It didn't intercept nothing, man. I mean, that's one of the easiest bets you could ever place in your life. Will the Russian air defense system work or not? I would say most times it probably does not work. I mean, if you bet for the success of the thing, I mean, I think it's a lost cause.
Well, it's not guaranteed. I mean, it could intercept something. I don't want to kill anyone's faith off the bat, folks. I mean, maybe Russian propaganda is right. Maybe this thing is actually infallible and it just hit a drone and blew it up in the cloud cover and we just didn't see it, maybe. I don't know. But let's find out. Let's watch this clip a little longer and find out if it actually did intercept a drone or if it didn't. The star shell is still burning up there just at the very edge of the cloud cover, illuminating the Vostochny Rayon. And it didn't intercept the drone. There's the explosion of the drone right on the air defense system.
Jeez, man. Another failure, by the way. Also, just out of curiosity, how much do those interceptors cost that the Russians keep firing off like this? Because, I mean, it's basically like a complete waste of money. It's like flushing like the worthless rubles down the drain.
Well, generally, from what we know, oh my, I had to go Google this, folks, really quick because I had to try and get a rough answer because I'm not exactly sure. I've heard some numbers between 800,000 to 1.2 million. And that actually is a general ballpark. Usually right now they're sitting around the ballpark price of 1.2 million per missile. So they just chucked a whole Russian main battle tank at that drone in cost. It missed. And then the air defense system that fired it got blown up anyways by the drone.
Big boo-hoo for them. Money down the drain and also a loss. That's a bad day.
Man, not a good day for Russia whatsoever. Actually, I'm sorry, folks. This might be a Vietnamese crew because it actually sounds like Vietnamese. Earlier, when I was covering this in the short war video, for some reason, I think I mistook this for Mandarin or Cantonese, and this actually sounds more like Vietnamese. So these might be Vietnamese sailors. We see the star shell still fizzling out up there after the drone hit. And oddly enough, the air defense is going quiet now. I wonder why.
Man, Putin's gonna call down here and ask him, did they fire? Yes, they fired, but it missed. No, I meant that you fired the bastards that fired the weapons. Like, fire those bastards, Bliat.
Yeah, honestly, man. Also, I saw someone say the S-400 is a Russian knockoff of the Patriot. Well, you know, a lot of people would think that because usually the West is the one who comes up with a weapon system first. But I have to tell y'all something that makes this more embarrassing for Russia. Russia is the one who made these air defense systems first. We made the Patriot to catch up. Let me explain why that's the case, because that sounds a little bit weird, but when you know the history behind it, you'll know why that is the case. Back in the day, in the 1960s, the United States Air Force was already beating the Soviet Air Force in spades in terms of aircraft quality and the amount of aircraft that we were able to field. And by the time of the 1970s, it was a complete lost cause for the Soviet Air Force. The Soviet Air Force was never going to be able to get the training hours that U.S. Air Force pilots got, and their aircraft were falling well behind, because at that point, we were beginning to enter the missile age, which largely revolved around advanced radar and computational systems to be able to fire off radar-guided missiles at a long range, and Soviet aircraft were just not keeping up. And so the Soviet Union was trying to come up with a way to be able to match and defeat the U.S. Air Force, but not with their Air Force. So what they came up with is the large caliber surface-to-air missile systems, which brought about the S-300. The S-300 was the first iteration of large battery, long-range surface-to-air missile defense systems that was supposed to be able to defeat the United States Air Force or contest the airspace without the Soviet Air Force being needed to be able to be on a one-on-one strength level with the United States Air Force. And the Soviets lauded these things as the most advanced and most capable air defense systems in the world. They'd be able to blow a pigeon out of the sky if need be to be able to try and stop the United States Air Force from just curb stomping the Soviet army on the ground at any given point. And so the United States said, damn, this thing is kind of good. And honestly, the Soviets might have a point with this thing, because back then we didn't know how good they were. Now we know they suck. But back then we thought they were pretty good. So we started to race to try and replace our Hawk air defense system, which was generally our most advanced one at the time, which wasn't even close to the S-300. And that's why we developed the Patriot as a counter to the S-300, thinking that it was that good. Turns out the S-300s and the S-400s suck. They can't pick up anything on radar. They can't even hardly pick up an actual aircraft on radar. So it turns out we made the Patriot for really no reason. The U.S. Air Force would have curb stomped the Soviet Union in a hypothetical war, and it looks like we're watching that in real time again. Also, by the way, just to point this out, The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has not put out footage yet from their attack drones and the camera footage that they were getting, so we'll probably be seeing that tomorrow, highly likely. So if Matthew makes a short video, you'll probably see it first there. And it's highly likely that this drone either just hit a ship in the Vostochny Rayon, or it just hit the air defense launcher itself, because this explosion quite literally came from this very northern area of the Vostochny. So either it hit the S-400, which did fire from this area, or it hit one of the ships at mooring here in the Vostochny Rayon.
So. Also, by the way, real quick, we are getting some more video of these attacks that are ongoing on Russia right now. The air raid sirens are going crazy right now inside of Voronezh, inside of mainland Russia. It looks like there is a confirmed impact there as well. We just got some video out of Voronezh, and it looks like, I can't tell where it hit, but it hit some building out in the distance. I just can't tell what that is. Sadly, the video is from a very odd angle, so I really can't tell, but let's hear the video and hear what's happening. It's a pretty short one.
Also, it's probably not going to show this well because it's only 4 seconds long. That little smoke plume right there is the hit at the very first second of the video. So here's the clip. Definitely a fire that's broken out from this impact. And if we were to try and do a little bit of geolocation here, there's a building off to the side of him, which appears to be a Brezhnevka. And if we go to Voronezh, keeping in mind that that's a Brezhnevka that this guy is in because it's taller than 4 to 6 stories, which all Khrushchevkas were built at that height, we might be able to get an idea that he is somewhere, well, definitely not there. He is probably somewhere out here in one of these buildings, I'd assume, and he's looking towards this area, probably near to the rail yard in central Voronezh, near to the train station. We're not exactly sure, but it looks like it might have also come from this industrial site just a little bit to the north, as generally the geolocation there would line up, and it also looks like there's a couple of higher rise buildings that would line up with the kind of site picture that we're getting in this clip, which appears to be low density residential, but still with some Brezhnevkas kind of scattered around out there in the general area where that strike landed, right over there. So this looks to be coming from the central industrial area of Voronezh, but we'll of course have to wait for further geolocation because once again, folks, I'm doing this off the hip and it's a very rough estimate at this point, but definitely looks to be a strategically landed hit and not falling debris as the Russians are going to end up calling it. Also, Mandy, it looks like you were able to find us more footage from the Taganrog attacks.
Yeah, we have some more footage from Taganrog as well, some more explosions there. It looks like it could have been actually multiple explosions in Taganrog, so several confirmed hits.
And so let's take a look at these clips.
Это куда? Это в дом.
We hear the air raid sirens.
Fisher Price noises in the distance. It sounds like Russian air defense sirens.
Bro, they got them slide whistles going off out there, man. They got that whoop, whoop, bro. It's like, get that trash out of here. Now they're just cycling through the sound effects. But definitely a dead-on hit in Taganrog. Moving us on from this clip and on into our next one, we are also able to see this as well. Once again, showing the impact. And we also hear the air raid sirens there. Just had to try and stop and listen to that really quickly. We can also see this video as well. She appears to just be a bystander talking about the sound of the explosion that they just heard, although they don't have video of it. And we also have this picture here, once again, showing either the explosion in Taganrog or another explosion that has occurred in Taganrog. So right now, live on air, we can confirm that the cities of Voronezh and Taganrog are still taking direct hits, which, interestingly enough, are very close to Ukraine relative to the other attacks that Ukraine is probably going to be conducting, meaning that there are drones in the air right now in large numbers of the Russian Federation that are traveling even farther, and we'll mostly be getting news throughout the entirety of the show at this point of further attacks and damage as these drones continue to make it deeper in and to each city that's on the target list for this round of attacks. In the meantime, a lot of people are talking about these significant attacks that the Ukrainians have been conducting on key Russian ports today, which before we get on into this poll, I do want to make sure to round out a little bit more additional news, considering that the drone attacks were very wide sweeping today in southern Russia and also in the occupied territories of Ukraine. We're going to knock out a couple of more things before we get to this poll, so that way y'all can have as much information as y'all can to make your decision on the poll if you haven't voted yet. The port of Tuapse also came under attack as well last night, which we saw in this clip. Oh, bliat.
Big hits.
Very big hits, Bliet.
Is that AA fire?
It might be. The explosion kind of sounded more like a direct hit than anything. It didn't have the sharpness of like a air defense missile traveling over the speed of sound. So I think it might be an impact, but there also was intermittent air defense out there. But you wouldn't believe it, Matthew. This drone attack that we were watching actually did hit the refinery compound again, the one that billowed the toxic smoke over the city for days. That was about to warrant a full evacuation of the city. They hit it again tonight. So we don't know if a major fire has broken out yet. This happened almost right before we went on the show, but it is another direct impact on the refinery and oil loading port of the port of Tuapse.
Yeah, it's a very big hit.
And moving us on out of that, we've also been able to hear that within the area of the town of, let me make sure I get this right, Primorsko-Akhtarsk on the eastern coast of the Sea of Azov, a Russian drone storage facility was also hit. We were able to see that from a Russian military blogger channel that put out an alert that the facility had been directly hit and was confirmed to be hit. We're still waiting for video and picture evidence on that. In the meantime, while Ukrainian drones have been flying all the way into the Russian Federation in these areas, Ukrainian drones near to the front line, or not really near to the front line anymore, this is about 70 miles behind it, have been raining hell on the M14 highway again today to an extent that is almost unbelievable, to be entirely honest with y'all. We have seen that the Ukrainians have started to publish their own footage showing their attacks and what they're looking like on this highway between Mariupol and Melitopol, and it is a field of utter carnage at this point. Ukrainian drones are quite literally picking and choosing the exact vehicles and targets they're going to strike and destroy in real time on this highway 24/7. The losses are beginning to pile up at such a rate, it doesn't really appear that the Russians will be able to sustain continued supplies along this highway for much longer. We'll probably start to see the attrition rate is going to reach well above 60% here in the near future, as we're already hearing that the attrition rate is around 20 to 30%, and these range attacks only started to happen about a couple of weeks ago, meaning that in the next couple of weeks, it's definitely going to be hitting 60% if it keeps going at the current rate.
You know what's surprising is the Russians haven't done really anything to course correct now that they're getting hit left and right behind the rear lines like this with their logistics. They just keep sending trucks through. Like they're just like, well, you know, maybe some will make it through. They just keep sending them. They're not really doing anything to really like form defenses. They're not temporarily halting the trucks. They're not doing anything. They're just like plow through and hope you make it, basically.
You know, honestly, it seems like the Russian tactic of old of we're very slow to adapt. It'll probably take us 2 years to fix this problem, which they certainly don't have in this situation, and we'll try and figure it out over the next 2 years. Because they haven't even diverted any traffic from what we know, folks, down towards the Kerch Bridge at this point. It looks like traffic is still going at full-blown volumes on the M14 highway through southern Ukraine to try and keep the supply lines running. And right now, the attrition is insane. The attrition is insane really throughout this entire area south of Ukraine and in the occupied territories because of these long-range drone attacks. The Russians can't keep their oil ports running, they can't keep the Russian Black Sea Fleet rolling, and they also can't keep the supplies loaded and going as well on the M14, because Ukrainian drone attacks are making near every single normal operation impossible at this point. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this right now, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so today we're seeing that the Russians themselves are starting to acknowledge that their logistics are getting hampered so bad that they're about to run into a failure, like a failure that could actually cause a significant frontline compromise for the Russians in this area. Also, do you happen to have that post, by the way? Because there was a Russian blogger, a military blogger, that put out a post earlier today, and it was very dire. And in fact, it sounded like our analysis to a T, actually. Let me go grab this real quick because I don't think you have it. I have it down here. Yeah, I have it down here at the bottom real quick. Let me go grab this because I need y'all to see what this guy was saying because it sounds like identical to the comments we were making last night. But let's see here if I can find it on the spot real quick. Let's see here. It's in here somewhere. Filibuster for a second. Let me see if I can spot it.
Generally, folks, sadly, I don't put those types of posts on the map for the larger part because Russian opinions are kind of like a dime a dozen. But this one is actually quite an interesting one. I just didn't put it on the map. So hopefully we'll be able to get it really soon because the situation is looking so grim that it appears that not only are we starting to analyze the situation as bleak for the Russian army, but even the Russians and the Russian military bloggers are beginning to see that the situation is incredibly grim for their strategic outlook within the Southern Front. And here, after we get through this poll and also get through this post by the Russian military blogger, it becomes obviously clear that the front line is already suffering from this supply shortage that we're seeing at the moment right now because of these Ukrainian attacks on Russian supplies in the deep behind-line areas like the M14 highway and the Azov coastline. So hopefully we'll be able to get that post.
So I just put it in the likes tab. Go grab this one real quick. It's from Preston Stewart, actually. He took it off of Telegram and reposted it onto Twitter. Let's take a read of this real quick. So here's what he's saying right here. They're saying all of these hysterics are primarily related to the total defeat in the drone war. They say those familiar with the situation on the key logistical routes of the new regions know that the Ukrainians already completely dominate there and systematically knock out everything that moves on those routes. And the scale of the losses is already huge, but they continue to increase every month, and all roadside areas are littered with burned trucks and military equipment, and thus the roads that were previously considered deep rear areas, that is about 30 kilometers and further from the Lugansk People's Republic, are now losing more than 100 vehicles a week just on logistics. They said by the autumn, this will lead to a total paralysis of all the logistics from the Kharkiv region to Crimea, which will make the continuation of military operations completely impossible. And this is coming from the Russians, by the way. He said that there is no countermeasures for it, and damn it, that's the outcome. That's coming from a Russian mill blogger, by the way, so he's not very optimistic, and that's the propaganda view of it, by the way. It's actually worse than he's even saying it, which we'll get to in just a second. But Enforcer, do you want to weigh in on that right there real quick? Because that's a pretty wild admission from the Russians.
Big dub for Preston Stewart, by the way. He did put this out. I actually did have this post on the map. It's just that I was looking for a military blogger. But outside of that, I would have to say that the situation does look pretty bleak. It's rather grim. Because I've seen some people, well, not a lot, I always say a lot, but I've seen some people in the chat say, oh, but this is just a prediction, it doesn't mean anything. But here's the problem with that idea. The Russian Federation relies, much like every army, on supplies to be able to reach their troops to keep them running. Ammunition doesn't grow out of the ground spontaneously when an infantryman steps foot into the muds of Ukraine. Then ammunition has to be brought to them on a truck, and they have to have enough ammunition to last them throughout the rest of the war, or a continuous supply of it coming through to keep them fighting through the rest of the war. They also have to have food, they have to have replacement equipment, replacement body armor if they get any, replacement uniforms, replacement boots. They have to get everything that y'all need for daily life supplied to them continuously by the significant logistical chain that exists behind the lines. If the Ukrainians make it impossible for that tonnage of supplies of whatever type it is to get to the front lines to the Russian army that's currently fighting right now, they do not have ammunition to shoot at the Ukrainians. They don't have drones to use against the Ukrainians. They don't have anything to even eat or drink. You can't really fight a war if you're starving to death and you're dying of thirst, and you also don't have bullets to shoot at Ukraine. That means that the frontline situation quite literally becomes untenable, and because the supply lines have been severed in the rear from these drone attacks, the Russians will have to retreat however far they need to until they can access a significant flow, well, a reasonable flow of supplies to be able to keep their armed forces running. So I generally say that this Russian military blogger's analysis is a little bit over the top, I'll have to admit, because it probably won't completely stop. There will be some supplies to get through, but in the practical sense, the front lines will collapse over the next several months if this supply situation does not change for the Russians right now. This is quite literally an untenable strategic position to be in, and a lot of people aren't talking about that right now in the chat. So Matthew, what are people's opinions on this, and what are your opinions on this as well?
So it looks like about 42% of the audience said the collapse of logistics has already begun for the Russian forces in the southern region of occupied Ukraine. 29% said the collapse will take months, and 21% said the collapse will take only weeks. And I would argue that the collapse has already begun. Yesterday, we went over the post that the Russians are making, stating that they're running low on drones, and the Ukrainians are fielding so many against the Russian frontline forces, which is the primary method, by the way, for defeating the Russians and eliminating each soldier. About 80% to 90% of the frontline deaths of the Russians are conducted by drone warfare. So if the Russians fall behind in that aspect, then not only can they defend, they can't really defend against drones at all at that point. They also also can't conduct offensive operations either against the Ukrainians. And it sounds like they're already running low, and that's probably because they can't get the drones at the front line because the trucks are getting hit way behind the lines in occupied Ukrainian territory. So I would argue, I'm with the 42%. I would say the collapse is already here, and we'll start seeing the effects start appearing on video and also anecdotal evidence very shortly. We're waiting on some more of that. We're already hearing the Russians fearmonger like crazy, and really it's not fearmongering, it's the truth. The collapse is going to be coming soon. So we'll just see how bad it's going to get. But Enforcer, what say you?
This is pretty bad. Like there's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's pretty bad. Here's why. Now, let me remind everyone here. Why in the world did Napoleon lose the Napoleonic Wars? He lost them because he invaded Russia during the winter, and the Russians conducted the scorched earth doctrine to destroy any sort of usable resources that Napoleon's army could use to feed itself and arm itself for its continued march deeper into Russia. And because their supply lines were so long and there wasn't enough supplies to support the army of Napoleon in the winter, they froze to death and had to conduct a flying retreat out of Moscow and lost the entire army of the French Empire in the process. Why in the world did Germany lose the Second World War, at least as quickly as they did? That's because Germany decided in 1941 to invade the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, and during that time, the Soviet Union also conducted a scorched earth doctrine which destroyed any of the supplies that the German army could use to live off the land and to be able to continue their offensive deeper into Moscow. Because of that, Germany's supply lines became far too stretched for the amount of forces that they were attempting to supply over the distance that they were trying to supply them on, and because of that, the supply lines collapsed, and we saw, also due to the fact that the Nazis didn't really prepare for any winter warfare either because they assumed that the conflict would be over before then, that the German army started to stall. This allowed the Soviet Union enough time to get into the sweet Lend-Lease from the United States that helped to fortify their supply lines, and they were able to slowly push them back all the way across Eastern Europe and back to Berlin over the next 3 years. So clearly, losing supply lines or having supply lines that are stretched way too thin, that are supplying too little to a force too big, will lead to an army being defeated or utterly collapsing. Those are just two examples pertaining to Russia, but there is an endless amount of examples like this throughout every war. Really, most every war is lost due to a failure of logistics when you look at it in reality. Why in the world did the Empire of Japan lose? They just didn't have the supply capacity or the production capabilities of the United States in the Second World War. That's as simple as it gets. Why in the world did the Confederacy lose against the Union? They didn't have the supply capacity like the Union had and the industrial output during the Civil War. Simple equations. It's very simple to see that the Russians do not have and are losing the supply capacity that they would need to be able to continue this war effectively against the Ukrainians, even on the defensive. If the Russian army does not have food to eat, water to drink, and bullets to shoot, they are not able to hold the frontline positions that they have at the moment right now, and they will inevitably start to lose the front. It's not going to be immediate, though. It'll probably take a couple of months, so I would generally be with a group that says it'll probably take a couple of months, because we're starting to see indications that the front is getting fragile, but it usually takes months for supply shortages like this to really set in and cause irreparable damage to the Russian position in Ukraine. But outside of that, we actually have breaking news that's happened on air at this moment. So, Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so I'm getting some new anecdotal evidence here that apparently what was used in that video that we just watched from, let me check the location one more time, make sure I got this. So apparently in Taganrog at the air base there, the locals are reporting that missiles were used and not drones. I'm currently seeing some allegations and anecdotal evidence that maybe the Storm Shadow missiles might have been used possibly in Simferopol and also maybe even in Taganrog as well. That would be a little bit unusual, I will say, because Storm Shadow is something that's kind of rare for Ukraine to field. It's a very expensive weapon, and largely it's reserved for very high value targets for the most part. So they're saying that it could have been a Storm Shadow strike. It looks like some Russian back channels are also suggesting that as well, and it does appear that's the case. They're saying, and also it looks like the Russians were warning that there was a Storm Shadow preemptive strike that was going to be taking place on Crimea as well. So it sounds like it's plausible. There's also some pictures coming out showing a whole bunch of air defense missile fire going up in one singular location. So I don't know. Like that's a question mark. What do you think, Enforcer? Could it have been a Storm Shadow attack? It seems a little bit strange.
I would say probably not. I don't believe that the British or the French have given permission for the Scalp or the Storm Shadow to be used on Russian territory. In some instances, by the way, we have seen them used before, but I mean quite literally just right across the border. It's very rarely ever far into Russia. So I would say that this attack on Taganrog would be probably outside the permission that the British and the French would give to Ukraine to conduct an attack with. It could have been a Flamingo, or it could have been possibly a Bars cruise missile, the smaller type, because those are Ukrainian made, so the Ukrainians obviously have permission to use those anywhere they would want.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking maybe it could be the Bars, because the Bars jet-powered drone that Ukraine fields, it looks and sounds like a cruise missile. Like when you see it flying in, it has the jet sound to it. It has like a little small turbojet on it, and it has the two little like winglets at the front, like you would see a cruise missile would have on it. So I think the locals might have gotten confused and saw one of those Bars coming in and thought that maybe it was like, you know, a Storm Shadow. Although I would argue that the silhouette of a Storm Shadow is a lot different than the Bars. Even at that, it's also a lot larger too. The Bars is a smaller weapon than a Storm Shadow. So maybe they just got confused. Possibly that seems more likely.
And let me see, folks, I'm trying to get y'all pictures here because I see a lot of people saying, what the hell's a Bars and what's a Storm Shadow? So I'll quickly show y'all some of the pictures. So the Storm Shadow, or the Scalp EG, which was an Anglo-French design concept that has been produced and fielded by both the British Army, well, really the British Armed Forces and the French Armed Forces, is a low-visibility cruise missile that has a range of about 250 to 300 miles. We have seen that the British and French have supplied a significant amount of these to the armed forces of Ukraine over the course of several years, but generally these have been limited to attacks inside of occupied Ukrainian territory. So usually we see these conducting attacks on Donetsk, Luhansk, and also Crimea when they're ever used. And considering that we did hear of explosions in Simferopol and apparently the sound of missiles in that area, it could be very likely that that was a Storm Shadow. However, we've not really seen that the British or the French have given a huge amount of permission, and generally have to give permission on a case-by-case basis for the Ukrainians to ever use these types of weapons on Russian soil. Many of their uses on Russian cities are exceptionally rare, even if they are in range. And this is to make sure that the war doesn't escalate out of control. On the other hand, however, the Ukrainians do have, and honestly, if you looked at these while they were flying, the Storm Shadow and the Scalp are smaller, but they kind of do look a little bit similar, because Ukrainians also have this whopper of a missile called the FP-5 Flamingo. The FP-5 Flamingo is basically Ukraine's answer to the Tomahawk cruise missile, since nobody would really give them one. They kind of just made their own, and what's even crazier is that they souped the thing up. It has a larger explosive warhead than a Tomahawk, a longer range, it also travels at a very similar speed, and its accuracy is just slightly less. And when I mean slightly less, it is going to hit its target, but it might be a couple of feet margin of error from the actual site that it was supposed to hit. These things have been incredibly effective when we've seen them used against Russian targets inside of the Russian Federation, and this could have been used against Taganrog, but we're not entirely sure at the moment. And then the last option, this is the most affordable and probably the most fieldable option for Ukraine, would be the Bars cruise missile. These are an incredibly small cruise missile that actually uses a hobby jet engine to be able to propel the missile to its target, that are a lot smaller, have a very significant explosive yield, mind you all, but also are cheaper and easier to produce, therefore there's a larger number of them, and the Ukrainians can field these in far larger numbers than either the Storm Shadow or the Flamingo. Considering that all cruise missiles kind of have a similar outline and design to them, although they're different significantly in size, the Flamingo being the largest, the Scalp being the mid-range size weapon, and the Bars being incredibly small compared to the other two. It could have been most likely the Flamingo or the Bars, considering that permission being given by the French or the British to conduct an attack on a Russian city with a British or French missile probably was not given. So I have a feeling they're probably misinformed about what type of missile just hit their city.
Yeah, maybe so. But in the meantime, though, outside of that, we do have some images emerging from Sevastopol. It looks like we're getting our first images here where we can kind of see exactly what has been hit. It looks like it's turning daylight over there right now. The sky is orange. And also in one image here, you can see there is fire coming from a location right there. If I'm not mistaken, by the way, I think I've seen this spot right here hit before. Is this something having to do with the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet or something right here?
It's something definitely to do with the port facilities, because you see the red-roofed buildings right around the port facility. This looks like the southern side. Let me see here, folks. That's not the red-roofed buildings we're looking for. Those look like shit. Yeah, those were rough. Let's see. Oh, man, let's see. It might be a little bit difficult to try and find these on the spot, folks, so give me just a quick second. So it's generally, it does have an angled roof to it. It's not flat. So it could be one of these buildings in this area around right here. The Russian naval headquarters was quite literally leveled off the face of the planet a little while ago, so I don't think that one would be hit again, but it definitely looks to be on the southern side of the port of Sevastopol and somewhere within the naval facilities.
Yeah, it does. Those red roof buildings right there look very familiar. It does harken back to when Ukraine struck the headquarters building where all the top naval leaders were hanging out at, and apparently took several of them out like 2 years ago. But this looks very, very similar. So I would not be surprised to hear about possibly some losses of personnel, maybe, since it looks like they targeted a building.
It does look like they targeted a building. Unfortunately, folks, we just can't say exactly what building has been hit yet, because it's hidden behind some others. I really want to find this and geolocate this on air, but I have to say, folks, sadly, it's hard to do that because on air, at least, because we kind of have to keep the show rolling, and this generally stops the momentum. So I probably won't be able to do a really good geolocation to find out exactly where this is on air.
So I got some info right now. We got this info right here on the air. The enforcer said we can't geolocate it, but we can bring you some other news though. The Russians are claiming right now that this airstrike hit the building of the Air Force headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet on Gogol Street in Sevastopol. Reports a subscriber of the Crimean Wind Channel, which is they say well connected and things like that inside of Russia. So I was wondering, it looked like a headquarters building, like that general area that we were looking at kind of had the same look of the naval part of the headquarters that got hit 2 years ago. So it sounds like it was the Air Force headquarters possibly. Well, of course, we'll have to get more confirmation on that, but it appears to be the early reports are from the Russians is that was what was hit. If that was the building that was indeed hit, I would be surprised if we don't hear about casualties coming out of that building of some of the top commanders that could have been hanging out in there.
This is probably responsible for the operation of Russian rotary and fixed-wing aviation in Crimea, which is a fairly significant sort of an operation to hit and destroy as far as a command center. Unfortunately, folks, I cannot find a Google Street in Sevastopol. This might be a Russian renaming of a street, because generally all of these streets on Google have retained their Ukrainian names and haven't been renamed to whatever the hell the Russians are calling them. So I might not be able to find this street on air, because the maps in Russia will show Google Street, but the ones we have probably will not. So it's somewhere within this area, however. This is where most of the headquarters are at inside of Sevastopol, so we can confirm that at a minimum. So generally the geolocation was fairly close. We just don't know exactly where the building is, although we do have a satellite picture of it right there.
Yeah, so we'll have to wait for more details on that. But if that gets confirmed, that could be a very, very big loss for the Russians, because we saw that they were firing some air defense. It obviously missed a couple of them. We saw one of the misses on camera. So that could be a big loss. We'll just have to wait and see.
And generally, folks, the loss is significant, and how it will impact the front is that the actual centralized command headquarters that was continuing normal operations has been hit. So whatever backup headquarters the Russians have, they do have one that's guaranteed. They're going to have to be trying to come online, and this means that there might be some combat operations that are being derailed by this attack that the Ukrainians were trying to derail to make sure that they weren't going to be followed through on, as they might have some sort of a negative effect on their defensive or offensive conditions in the southern front of the moment, considering that this headquarters would be operating most of the Russian rotary and fixed-wing aviation in Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and Crimea. Because we generally know that the front right now is divvied up into two parts by Russia, both of them commanded out of Rostov-on-Don, but they have the southern front, which consists of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, and then they have the eastern front, or as they would call it, the western front, which is inside of Luhansk and Donetsk, and also Kharkiv to a limited extent. So I hope that does address that well, at least from what we're seeing right now, but it does look like there was a significant hit that we can now confirm within Sevastopol. But I hope we've answered that poll incredibly well, and also gotten some more breaking news to y'all here at this moment right now that's currently happening in the midst of these major attacks, and it looks like they're definitely major without a shadow of a doubt. Before we move on into the rest of our news, however, I do want to say a humongous thanks to everybody who has been watching the show so far tonight. We've had 16,800 people here at the peak, and 60,000 people have watched the stream in an hour. That's 1,000 people a minute, and we're entirely honored and greatly appreciative to know that so many of y'all are continuing to watch this show and considering it to be your primary source of news. I hope that we have been able to cover the news incredibly well so far tonight, because it does appear that we still have a lot to go and a lot of major breaking news that is coming out at this moment. But before we get get on into the rest of our news in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and also the rest of the world, including the Middle East, I do want to make sure that we take a brief moment to get 3 questions from the chat before we move on into the rest of our news. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so our first one goes to none other than Hokey Redneck, a longtime channel legend, and thank you very much, Hokey, for that very generous $100 support, by the way, one of the largest ones of the night, and we do appreciate that very, very much. And Hokey said, will Ukraine stop at the border if they keep winning?
I would generally say yes. If the Ukrainians were somehow able to sweep the field today and push the Russians back as far as they wanted to, with no limitations, they'd stop at the Ukrainian border, and that would be the end of it. Because the war, how the war is structured right now, it's entirely a defensive war for Ukraine and an offensive war for Russia. There isn't really a concept, at least on the Ukrainian end, of unconditional victory over the Russian Federation, because that would lead to them getting nuked. So considering the fact that they could get nuked if they started to push into Russia pretty significantly, they are going to stop at the Ukrainian border. All this war is for the Ukrainians is attempting to fight to see that the Ukrainian state survives, to also see that the Russian Federation is expelled out of the state of Ukraine and its 1991 borders as well. So once they make it to a border anywhere, they're going to stop. And the reason why we know that already is the smaller battles, like, for example, the battles in the Sumy Oblast, the battles in the Kharkiv Oblast, and others, where the Ukrainians were actually able to repel and defeat Russian offensives in those areas. Once they're pushed back across the border, the Ukrainian offensive stops right then and there, and they do not push forward. The Ukrainians do not have any public claims against Russian lands that they would attempt to annex or capture, and so continuing the war to take over Russian land that would be given back to Russia anyways once the war ends generally wouldn't be a strategic use of resources, and they would decide to just not push in. So the answer to your question is yes, they would stop at the border if they make it to it. And I have a feeling that with how things are going in the South, they're probably going to be making it to some border at some time, probably within the next year if this keeps up the way it is. But a humongous thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, Hokey Redneck, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to have someone here from Washington, D.C. who respects that train and rode that Amtrak Crescent all the way down to Tuscaloosa, which is Tuscaloosa, by the way, before anyone was like, oh! But anyways, a humongous thanks to you so much once again, and with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and our second super chat of the night is going to go to Bobby, also known as LC39A, to all the channel legends out there. And he put in a $100 support. And thank you very much, Bobby, for that support. And also, it is good to see you once again. He's back once again and throwing in that massive support, by the way. And we're very appreciative. He said that this is my happy cha-ching to you.
And a big thanks to you for the incredible support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, LC39A, this thing wouldn't be possible. I gotta say, it's a great thing to see you back. I see you in the live chat every once in a while, very intermittently recently, but we're always happy to have folks back. It's good to see you again, and I hope that you've been enjoying the stream lately. We always love to know that folks have been with us for years, like you and BC Skyman and many others who have been with us for an incredibly long amount of time. I think right now, well, Hokey Redneck's definitely been around for years. Glock Who's There, who we're about to get to in a second, has also been around for a long time, and there are a load of people in the live chat right now who have been here for eons, like AF Kaplan, Max Shabui, and many others that I'm seeing right now, like Mestiza. I gotta say, it's an incredible thing to know that folks like you are still sticking around and helping this channel to keep rolling, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep the lights on, we wouldn't be able to pay the bills, and we wouldn't be able to keep doing this as our full-time job each and every day to keep on top of things and report them as accurately as we can. So massive thanks to you once again. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news from around the world. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, and this one's going to go to Mr. Glock Who's There, another channel legend, and he's back again, just like Bobby as well. And thank you very much, Mr. Glock, for that $50 support. Also very generous of you, by the way. He said, any news from the FSB finding magnetic mines on the Russian LNG tanker and LSA rocks? I saw that story the other day. I think the Enforcer saw that too. I don't think we covered it. I didn't cover it in my video. I'll be honest. I saw the story and I was like, first of all, I got to take the FSB's word for it. And that's the problem number one that I had with the story. Number two, all it was really anecdotal evidence. They didn't provide any pictures I could see on my end. So that's why generally I didn't report on it for the most part. But it is possible that it happened. It's just very shaky evidence. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would definitely have to agree. I don't really think there's a lot of corroboration in that story. The FSB isn't really what people make it out to be. It's not really that good at anything. We've seen the Ukrainians style on the FSB for years now with the SBU in Ukraine. And so I would generally say I don't really believe much of what they put out. Most everything they say is a fabrication. And then on top of that, they've been proven to be incredibly incompetent in intelligence and counterintelligence gathering throughout the whole of the war. So I would generally discredit most everything that they put out, given that fact. But a humongous thanks to you for that incredible support, Glock Who's There, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope that does address that well. And with that in mind, it is time for us to move on out of this question segment and back into the news. as we have been able to hear of some major developments near to the Belarusian border. As many of y'all know, the drama of Belarus possibly entering the war or not has been ongoing for a couple of weeks now. It seems that the Ukrainians are saying, intelligence-wise, they're starting to get indications that Belarus may be trying to join the conflict. And at the earliest, that would most likely happen in autumn. So there is a good whiles away, a couple of months at least, before we start to see that Belarus would seriously get involved and conduct armed actions against Ukraine. And right now, we're in what we would call the diplomatic pre-phase of the war, meaning that right now there's some diplomatic jockeying to be done, some possible deterrents, some possible threats, and it might get the Belarusians to back off of whatever their plans or ambitions are. The Belarusians are trying to make a case at this very moment right now that has led the Ukrainians to just tell them frankly today what kind of a position Belarus really is in. And this is the claim that Belarus made that was apparently the straw that broke the camel's back. Belarus Security Council secretary claimed that Ukrainian drones are regularly crossing into Belarusian airspace and, in some cases, trying to hit border infrastructure. Speaking in Moscow, Alexander...
All right, we have polls in right now, coming in for well, the poll that I had out. It said let me know what you think. Should we attack and get it over? Keep talks going. Not sure. Keep blockade and bomb and invade. 20% of y'all said we should attack and get it over. 0 said keep talks going. 0 said not sure, and 80% said keep blockade and bomb and invade. So I mean, y'all heard it first here with the poll, y'all. So we're going into poll now. So and get on with the news.
Wolfovich said that Belarus recorded 166 drones over the past week that violated Belarusian airspace and used air defenses 59 times. He also claimed Ukraine is mining border areas and conducting reconnaissance of Belarusian territory. This statement,
that's kind of a strange idea, isn't it? If the Belarusians are saying so many drones are
border, apparently they must have an insider in the government in Minsk in Belarus that was able to deliver information back to Ukraine that the Belarusian government is working on fabricating a justification to get involved in the war. Because if there is ever a justification to get involved in a war, this is exactly what would justify a country getting involved in a conflict. Also, the fact that they added in that Ukraine is mining border areas and conducting reconnaissance of Belarusian territory is attempting to frame the Ukrainian preemptive defensive actions on their border as preparatory offensive actions. So that way, if their offensive didn't go well, they have a defensive line to immediately fall back to, which is how the Belarusians are trying to present the current Ukrainian defensive works that are being made along the Belarusian border. This is showing us quite clearly at this point that the Belarusians are starting to go through the process, which would take up until about autumn, for them to justify themselves entering the conflict and make it seem to the international stage or the international world that they have some sort of a justification to go into the conflict. The Ukrainians have made it clear they're not flying with this shit at all. And they say today that they've identified 500 targets on the territory of Belarus that would be hit if Lukashenko declares to enter the war on the side of Russia. So they already...
Also, that was Magyar that said that, wasn't it? I think that Magyar came out and made that statement today, like the commander of the Ukrainian drone forces.
Yeah, he was the one, man. They made it, bro. Like Belarus said, they're doing something to us and there's literally nothing happening to them. Magyar said, we will burn your country to sin or something like that.
Honestly, though, it's the right response. It's like if Belarus wants to play stupid and start playing games. It's like, if you want to jump in the war, Ukraine's ready for it. So it's like Belarus's military is not, any better than the Russians' military. In fact, it could be worse potentially. We don't know, but yeah, that's a pretty baller move to literally say, oh, we got literally the sights aimed in on your country, by the way. So if you want to play, go at it.
Man, they said we're going to blow that mustache off Lukashenko. Man, like they said, we're not playing. But beyond that, the interesting thing about this, folks, is that a lot of people say, well, this is just words being thrown around by both sides. But here's what's interesting about the diplomatic pre-war phase: is that the words words mean a lot right now because there's not going to be any shooting for months. Right now, everybody's trying to jockey to figure out if Belarus is willing to actually get involved in the war, if their justifications would have any merit, or if they look like they have any merit, and whether they'd be willing to take the risk. So right now, Ukraine making threats like these are actually somewhat significant. These are diplomatic threats of deterrence. They're making it clear that if the Belarusians enter the conflict in any way, they are going to have the upper hand against Belarus from day one. And the funny reality is that they would. Belarus doesn't have an armed force that is built to stand on its own and fight on its own, and it hasn't for 21 years since the Common Defense Pact they made with Russia in 2005, which turned the Belarusian military into a logistical puppet army of the Russians on their own home soil. So generally, Belarus wouldn't be able to pull off any sort of offensive operations against Ukraine unless it was the Russians launching an expeditionary force from Belarusian territory into Ukraine. Regardless, the Ukrainians are making it clear they're going to start turning Belarus into a pile of burnt ash like an old campfire if they try and get involved in any way, shape, or form, like they're starting to work towards at the moment right now in the diplomatic phase. So what are people saying about this right now, Matthew? What are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so Belarus is now accusing Ukraine of regularly sending drones into Belarusian airspace, and they say that Putin's informed. I guess that's their equivalent of calling Mulder, I guess. Like, hey, help, Putin, help! What do you think about this? 63% said it's a false flag provocation that's in the works. 23% says it's just an intimidation tactic, and 10% said it seems like it could be true. And I would say to me, it sounds like the beginning of a false flag. That's what it sounds like to me. Belarus has been moving around forces in their country. They've, of course, been participating in Russian nuclear drills. We also heard the reports that apparently Russia had moved nuclear weapons into Belarus recently. So Belarus is becoming very active for a country that doesn't want to get involved in the war, which to me makes me think that the Ukrainian intelligence is accurate. I've been saying that for a while. I believe the Ukrainians. I think the Belarusians are actively planning to get involved in the war by either letting the Russians attack from Belarusian territory into Ukraine from the north, or Belarus themselves might use their military to attack Ukraine potentially. But I think Belarus is pretty much planning on getting involved at this point. I think it's becoming clear, and now they're coming up with a reason to get involved. So not looking good. And if Belarus does get involved, that starts bringing up the question of whether or not NATO is going to step in at that point. Because if all these countries like Belarus, Russia, etc., start ganging up on Ukraine, I don't think NATO's going to stand by. The U.S. might, because the U.S. right now is confused. But I think countries like Poland and other ones, I think they might decide to step in if that happens. So we could be looking at something major here. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that it's definitely a false flag provocation. Right now, the Belarusians are trying to build up justification to enter the war that would look legitimate, but it's probably not going to work all too well. If the Ukrainians are able to scare them off, which honestly they probably would be able to, the Belarusians are going to be up the creek without a paddle, and they're probably going to back off before they actually commit to anything in finality that actually starts an armed conflict on the border. Let me put it this way, folks. Lukashenko has an army that is run on a budget of $1.19 billion. Zoran Mondami, who is the mayor of New York City, could wipe this guy's ass because the NYPD has a budget of $6.4 billion, and it's a police force. Just to put this into perspective of what in the world the Belarusian military really is. The Russians might try and use Belarus as a launching pad to conduct an offensive in the northern area of Ukraine, but that's still going to open up Belarus to a lot of risk. The Ukrainians are making it clear that if the Belarusians ever permit the Russian army or themselves to conduct an offensive on Ukrainian territory from Belarus, they're going to start bombing everything that's of value in Belarus, which isn't really a lot, but still, for the Belarusians, it's everything they have. So this might get the Belarusians go, the risk is pretty significant, the benefits don't really exist, we might not want to let this happen, and we might have to tell Putin that even though we're a puppet, we really can't do that, because it's going to open us up to a great deal of harm and damage, and also if Belarus joins the conflict, Belarus is going to get obliterated, because unlike Russia, Belarus doesn't have all of the sanctions that Russia has on it. So they're in this nice little middle ground economically. There are some sanctions on them, I do want to make it clear, but not a whole lot of them. If they get directly involved in conflict, everybody's going to be smacking sanctions on Belarus like there's no tomorrow. So not only are the Ukrainians going to be destroying anything of value industrially in Belarus, they're also going to be saying that they're going to be completely cut off from any trade with anyone else economically, which isn't going to do them well whatsoever. So generally, I think they're probably going to be waffling on this one in the future because the Ukrainians are making it pretty clear there's a lot of risk to trying to get involved in this conflict. Also, isn't it kind of unbelievable, Matthew, that the NYPD literally spends $6.30 for every dollar that Belarus spends for its military?
That's kind of wild, actually. That is kind of crazy. I'm not really worried about Belarus necessarily militarily. Like, of course, it would be a new aspect that Ukraine has to deal with. I'm more worried about it being used as a launching point for new attacks by the Russian forces because it is, of course, close to Kyiv. So that's a problem. So that's more what I'm worried about. I'm worried about being used by the Russians to launch new attacks.
That's true, but even still, the Russians are pretty hard spent to even try new attacks because they have, as current fronts, like just to note them all, they have the Sumy front, they also have the Vovchansk front, they then have the entirety of the Kupiansk, Svatove, Severanski, Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Pokrovsk, the Konstantinivka, Velika Novosilka, or it's now called Novopavlivka, and then also the Bielopol, Orikhiv, and Kherson fronts, to name all of the active fronts right now. Each one of them requires almost an entire combined arms army or several divisions to be able to operate them and sustain those fronts, and we do understand that at the given moment right now, Russia is actually losing more men at the front than they're replacing by recruitment on the daily, meaning that their manpower reserves are actively depleting at the moment right now, and to just keep active action going on their existing fronts throughout Ukraine, they have to put uncommitted regiments or divisions onto the front just to be able to try and replace the ongoing losses. So the ability of Russia possibly conducting an offensive from Belarus, it's there, but it'd be pretty hard to sustain that for any period of time, and that offensive would probably peter out, especially if they start to take heavy losses, because there isn't going to be any significant reinforcements coming in after the opening offensive.
I would have to disagree. Like Steve was saying in the live chat, Russia is beginning mobilization. We just got an airport 24 hours ago. Russia is very strongly considering mobilizing a lot more people into the military. So I think, and of course, the timeline might not be immediate. Like we might not see this invasion from Belarus until maybe like the October season, perhaps, or autumn. We might not see it until then. So it could be months down the road that we see this actually break out and happen. And by then, Putin called up mobilization possibly by then. So I think the Russians can manufacture enough equipment and get the manpower if they need it to pull something like that off, because that's a very juicy prospect. If Lukashenko is somehow strong armed into letting Russia use that territorial launch attacks, I mean, it's like the golden ticket for Russia. Not that they would win, but it's a very juicy opportunity because Kyiv is right there, and they literally lob artillery, missile attacks, etc., and try to level Kyiv just from across the border if they wanted to. So I think they would find a way to make that happen if Lukashenko gave in.
Maybe, but I have to say there's a lot of buts, because if we also look at the Russian logistical side of the situation, what armor? Because they do have to have armor for an opening offensive, because the front would be mobile at that point, it wouldn't be secured and static yet. If they don't really have a lot of armor to conduct that opening offensive with, that's going to greatly slow down any offensive progress, meaning they're going to be moving at a crawl to be able to get anywhere, because they don't have any armor support to help them with direct fires to be able to suppress and push back the Ukrainians in an opening offensive. And also the logistics side is woefully horrendous at this point, especially with the southern front. And then to not even add that in, if the Russians start to see a front collapse in the southern front, they're probably going to have to start diverting all of their forces for a hypothetical northern offensive to the south, just to try and stabilize the front and stop the bleed of the square mileage that they'd be losing at that point if the supply situation becomes so bad they start seeing a total front collapse in that area.
Maybe. We'll just have to see on this one right here. But the one I'm not certain about a whole lot with Belarus and Russia in that whole situation. I'm sort of like taking good educated guesses. The one thing that I am pretty confident about at this point is I would say we can take the Ukrainian intelligence and largely put pretty good confidence behind it that Belarus will get involved one way or another in the war. I'm personally feeling very confident about that intelligence. It's starting to look like it's pretty concrete.
It is looking like it is fairly concrete. I mean, I would have to agree as well. It's very concrete looking at this point with what we've heard today. But I'm thinking, folks, there's so many extra variables and factors that just really aren't in Russia's favor right now that this would most likely entirely be on Belarus if it does happen, and the risk doesn't really weigh out the reward for Belarus if they did join in. So I'm kind of like, I'm more of the camp that I'm thinking the Belarusians are probably going to chicken out and back off before they ever get committed fully to letting the Russians conduct an offensive from their territory, or they conduct an offensive of their own from their own territory. I'm thinking there's a pretty decent possibility they're probably going to chicken out. That's just me. Of course, there's a lot of things that can happen between now and October or autumn that might change that situation where it becomes a lot more likely they join or they completely back out altogether. And we just haven't seen enough turnout yet to know exactly what's going to be happening. So with that in mind, I hope we have addressed that breaking news development well. And we do have to move you all on. Also, by the way, folks, I do have to include this picture right here just to get a little laugh for everybody. The Belarusian military, it is $1.1 billion a month, and for $6 billion, the NYPD gets parking enforcement trikes that they get to peddle around in New York City. You know, it would be something. I honestly, folks, am really interested. How in the world would the NYPD do if they went up against the Belarusian military with the kind of funding both of them have? I actually think the NYPD could wipe the floor. Imagine that. He's got a gun! Like, they're going to be going off. But anyways, moving us on out of that whole rabbit hole about the spending disparity, it is time for us to move on out of...
So that's all for the news tonight, y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed the show. We'll be back on tomorrow. Should be if we're not